to start off first by thanking everybody that sent me a sympathy card. Those were all read and really appreciated. What I want to do today is give you a little history on my mom's life and get who she was. She was born to Francis and Zygmunt suggested on February 22nd, 1935. Mom was the second oldest of 5 siblings. She had one older sister and 3 younger brothers. She grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on the Polish side of town. In the middle 1900s, Milwaukee was deeply segregated. There was a Polish south side, German north side. They also had African, Italian, and Jewish sections. More on that later. My mom's family split their time between living in Milwaukee in the wintertime when it was cold, and then spending their summers in a log cabin that my grandfather built up in Pripyat, Wisconsin, which is a small rural town about 2.5 hours north of Milwaukee. Mom had many stories about her family, and especially her dad, and on growing up on the farm. So I'll start with one about her dad she used to like to tell. Her dad, Sigmund, everyone called him Ziggy. And Mom's favorite story to tell about Ziggy, my grandfather, is how he ran moonshine for Al Capone during the Prohibition in the 20s. He did this as a teenager, so he wasn't even 20 years old yet. Ziggy never met Capone, but his goons hired Ziggy and paid him $75 cash to drive his Model A Ford across state lines, and there'd be somebody waiting there to pick up the booze and hand him $75. This went on for many years until one day the cops chased my grandfather. And I don't know how, my mom doesn't remember how, but he managed to get away, never got caught, but that was the end of his bootlegging career because the phone men never contacted him again. According to my mom, my grandfather had become a very wealthy man in his early 20s. He had about $50,000 to $80,000 in the bank, which by today's standards was somewhere around $1.5 to $2 million. So he was all set up in his early 20s, and then the Great Depression hit. His bank went bust, and my grandfather, like a lot of others, lost it all. The only thing that he was able to keep was the house that he had built, this log cabin up in Pripyat. Mom also loved to tell stories of growing up on this farm. Their log cabin had no indoor plumbing, no electricity. Heating came from a wood-burning stove in the kitchen. There was a wooden bucket that was next to the stove, and it was the kid's job to keep that bucket full of water. My grandfather would come in, and always that bucket would be empty. And in his grandfather's surly, old, mean guy voice, yelled at the top of his lungs and take the Lord's name in vain, which I won't do here, but he would yell out at those kids, if this GD house was to start on fire, that GD bucket would be the first thing to go. Mom was her dad's tomboy, as this picture of her wrangling a chicken shows. All the kids had different responsibilities. My mom was about 12 years old, but her responsibility was to make sure that the barn door was closed each night. Everyone owned up there in Pripyat about 10 acres of land, and so the closest neighbor was a good mile away. And one morning, a little bit after midnight, there was a knock on my mom's and grandpa's front door, their family, and it was a next door neighbor. And he said, hey, Ziggy, your cow is on my front porch. Mom had forgotten to shut the barn door that night. And yes, she was in trouble. So Ziggy, my grandfather, drove Mom over to the neighbor's house and made her walk the cow home in the pitch black darkness of this deep Wisconsin forest with just a flashlight. Mom remembers hearing coyotes, bears, and who knows what else that she thought were just a few feet away as she walked that cow home. But Mom never forgot to close the barn door again. She had many other stories about animals on the farm. I won't go into all of them, but just some some of them up by saying, Mom had to be very careful which animal became her pet because next week it could become dinner. My parents met when they were both teenagers. I mentioned before that Mom lived on the Polish side of town. Dad was from the German side. One day Dad was on a joyride with some of his buddies and they passed by my mom who was on her front porch. My dad struck up a conversation and he asked her out on a date. I don't remember how long they dated, but I do remember Mom saying that neither one of them were old enough to get married unless their parents signed for them. And my mom's parents were willing to sign. My father's parents were not unwilling, just a little reluctant. So my dad took my grandfather, his dad, aside and said, if you don't sign, I have a way to make it so we have to get married. And we did. So that was around 1954. Now somewhere in 58, my parents came out here to Culver City, or down in Los Angeles, Culver City. They came out from Milwaukee to go to one of my dad's cousins' wedding. They really liked the weather out here, but Dad was hesitant to move because he didn't know if he could find a job or not. But his Uncle Don was a supervisor at Helm's Bakery in Culver City. He guaranteed my dad a job if he wanted it, couldn't find anything else. So they loaded up everything they owned in a small trailer, hitched it to the back of their 1956 Chevy Bel Air, which I still have today, and they drove from Wisconsin to California, set up a flight out here. Dad found a job as a welder, and Mom did administrative work, clerical work for a real estate firm that was called United Multiple Listing Service, or UMLS. This is a picture of my mom with the girls she worked with. All of them went to the same Lutheran church down there. They became a really tight-knit family. And this firm, they published and printed all the homes for sale. This was, obviously before the internet, so they had to have all paper copies out to all the realtors and advertise. So that's what she did the majority of her career. I was born in 1960 and grew up in Culver City with them. Mom was into sewing and always made us these matching outfits. It's one of dozens of pictures I have. So it was fun growing up down there. I'm 65 years old now, and I can say that probably my favorite childhood memory was of not having back pain. But there's others, of course. Now, I'd probably still be down there, but in 1982, the job I was working for moved up here. He said, anybody want to come along? I said, sure, let's get married, let's move up there and start a family. Because of that decision, today I have 8 beautiful children who are all here with you today. And there's Crystal, Lisa, and Daniel. And with them are my daughter-in-law, 2 son-in-laws, and I have 4 beautiful grandchildren. This is a picture of my mom and my 3 kids. Daniel is now 39, so that's a little. Mom and Dad remained in Culver City until, or I should say, and then in 1992, my dad passed away. Mom remained a widow for the rest of her life. And my dad took such good care of my mom that I didn't know this, but when I went down there, I had to go show my mom how to pump gas into her own car. She had never done it before. Then from 92 to 97, she was down there. Finally, in 97, she decided it was time to move up here and be closer to us. So she bought an empty lot on Beverly Drive in Deerfield, and I started building the house that I live in today. Mom paid for all the building materials, and I did a lot of the labor work and acted as my own general contractor. I can honestly tell you guys that I could never afford to live where I do, where I do now, if it wasn't for Mom's extreme generosity and her utter selflessness to me and my family. Mom always spoiled me, and she loved me just for who I am. Besides my mom, the only other people who want me just for who I am are the police. Mom continued to enjoy her crafts. She made my daughter's poodle skirts, and she was into all types of crafts like leather tooling, knitting, crocheting, needlepoint, and even cake decorating. She made some awesome cakes. In June of 2000, my home was finally ready, and my family moved into it. And then 1 month later, we went down to Culver City with the biggest U-Haul you can find and rent, and we packed her all up and moved her up here. So now, 2000, she was officially from Culver City to Santa Maria. My mom's entire house moved up here, and she lived on Loch Lomond Drive, right by Rigetti High School. That's the house that I came from. And anybody who was in Spock at that time, which I get to, most of you know what Spock is, you went over to Potlucks over at that house. So that's where she was. Now, Mom loved to tell one other story, and that's about how, when she first got here, she was looking for a church. And she tried this little place called Lutheran Church of Our Savior on Patterson Road. She liked Pastor Eckert's sermons and thought the church was nice, but she had just started looking. This was her first church. She had other little churches to check out. But then, on her way out of service that Sunday morning, she was ambushed by Tussie Banger. Anybody remember Tussie? Well, Mom says this old gal was so vibrant and outspoken, and she grabbed onto my mom as Mom was passing by, and she goes, "Hey, you're new here, aren't you?" And she started then to tell my mom all about some activity that was going on that night, and how my mom just had to go with Tussie to this event. And so Mom really liked Tussie's outgoing personality, and they instantly became good friends. Mom never even tried to look for another church. Mom got involved in lifeless activities. She was a member of SPOC, which means Special People of Courage, which is a ministry for widows. She hosted SPOC potlucks at our local Roman house, where everyone got to play the vintage games that I restored. Her closest SPOC friends were Tussie, Joe Borcher, Betty Schluter, and Ingy Pierpont. Mom assembled the monthly Lycos newsletters with Ingy, Betty Schluter, Betty Rozek, and Ladine Hersman. Mom ensured the folders, they were folded neatly, and that they had the proper placement of address labels and postage. She made all kinds of crafts during this time also, including baptismal cloths for the altar guild and crocheted items for Upward Bound Preschool, which is here on this campus, for fundraisers they were doing. And her crafting and sewing and other talents were greatly appreciated by her good friend Molly Williams, who was the preschool director of Upward Bound at that time. Mom loved to make needlepoint crosses, and she had this one little specialty called Special Hugs lanyards that she would give away. I found her remaining stash of these items. They're over here on this table, and I would highly encourage everybody on your way out. There's these special hugs, there's crosses, there's all types of needlepoint and doilies. Everything on there was handmade, and I still have quite a bit at home. So please, if you want any kind of remembrance of my mom, take something on your way out. Mom liked to get together with her close friends, Ladine, Katie, Ann, and Molly, to celebrate their birthdays over lunch. Mom also served in the kitchen at LWML events, Vacation Bible School, and her broccoli salad was always a crowd favorite, for anybody who remember those days. Mom spent over 15,000 hours volunteering at various hospitals, and also in their gift store, and knitting beanie caps for newborn babies. Yeah, she definitely had a servant's heart. She gave 100% in everything she did. You know, I once heard it said that in everything you do, always give 100%, unless you're giving blood. Mom remained in our Loch Lomond home for 15 years, until she could no longer climb the stairs to the master bedroom of the second floor. It was about 2015. I remember going over there and seeing her ability to walk and to lift her legs, and I said, she can't be climbing these stairs to get up to the master bedroom. So I asked her, I said, Mom, how are you getting up the stairs? She told me, I crawl up the stairs on my hands and knees. I said, Mom, how then do you get back down the stairs? She said, I sit on my butt and I scoot down one step at a time. That was my mom. I said, you can't be doing this anymore. Please move in with us. So she did. We had 2 empty rooms downstairs. One became her bedroom, and the other was her craft room. Then COVID hit. During COVID, my church, which is Element, was shut down. I attended church with Mom here at Lighthouse. And you all continued to meet outdoors, erecting easy ups, setting up all those chairs every Sunday. Together, we collectively thumbed our noses at the government's no public gathering edict as we came together to worship our Lord. That first year, when the lockdown was in full swing, we even had the Foleys provide the fully catered Thanksgiving meal that they're used to over in our game room. Those were really good times, and I got to know many of you through those events. Well, then in 2023, Mom developed bladder cancer. Her brother had died from the same thing just a year earlier. I took her to radiation, and it worked. The tumor had shrunk significantly, and it was in remission, but her motor skills continued to decline, and she stopped driving all on her own. Didn't want to do it anymore. I had 2 caregivers coming in to the home. One is here today. The other couldn't make it, but I mean, that's how much my mom meant to these people, that their caregiver would be willing to come in and come to service. So thank you very much for that. But you know, she always enjoyed it when anybody would come to visit, and many of you came often. One of her favorite types of visits was when you came to sing Christmas carols, coming into our house. Did that for a couple Christmases, and she talked about that literally for days afterwards. That was one of her favorites. Speaking of visits, I want to recognize and personally thank some of you that came that I can remember. Or you called on the phone just to check in on how she was doing. So the Stolls, thank you very much. You were my mom's elders here at Lighthouse. Molly Williams, Sharon Leading, Aaron Bridges, who I've seen. Aaron was actually my mom's very first caregiver. Thank you very much for that, Aaron. Dennis and Peggy Payne, who came over to watch The Chosen with us many nights. We had dinner together. Pastor Oliver, who brought the Lord's Supper to my mom on a monthly basis. And a special thanks to Pastor's wife, Ruth. She always brought homemade bread with her. Debbie Cronan came over many times. Lisa DeMonica. And Lisa, I know you often brought other church members like Stephen Sasser, who I've seen here today. And there was even many others that I can't remember your name, so apologize. Now, I know there's some people that I'm forgetting, so forgive me for that, but there is one person I will never forget, and that is Karen Sheep. And I'm sorry if this is going to embarrass you. I know you don't like these actually, but I'm going to take a few minutes because I want this congregation to know that in my definition of a saint is what Anne is and who she is. Anne and her husband had us over, Joe, thank you very much, had us over many times to their house to play Rummy Cube. Anybody ever played Rummy Cube against Anne? She's wicked. I don't ever remember or my mom winning a game against them, but if they ever did, I'm sure they did it just because they felt sorry for us. But we would take Splash Cafe clam chowder over there, which Jill loves, And then there were many times that Ann actually made us dinner. And again, if you know anything about Ann's cooking, this was a 7-course meal that included a dessert and everything, even including the dessert was handmade. It was absolutely amazing. As Mom's health continued to decline and she became housebound, now what Ann did, she came and started making regular visits to my mom. I mean, every Friday, literally, without fail, for at least the last 2 years. Ann would always bring lunch that included a meat dish, something sweet like those Halloween candies, and a drink. Then Ann would take my mom out for a drive, anywhere, just to get her out of the house. On the very rare occasion that Ann had another obligation on Friday, she made it up by coming a day earlier or later. It was amazing. And because of that, Ann, Matthew 6:20 urges us to store up treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust can destroy. And I can't imagine how big your treasure chest is going to be when you get there. And it's not because you want to build that treasure. It's because you have the spiritual gift of visiting the infirm and comforting those in need. One more. Revelation 4, verses 10 and 11 describes how the 24 elders will cast their crowns at Jesus' feet. Some theologians interpret this as meaning that each of us earn crowns here on earth by the good things we do, and that we will cast them at the feet of Jesus when we see him face to face. And you're going to need a small entourage to help you carry all of your crowns into his throne room. You went above and beyond, and I can never, ever repay you for everything you did these last few years. Thank you very much. Elisa DeMonica, ex-Conan, you also came to visit many times. And for that, you brighten my mom's day with every visit. I mentioned earlier that Mom always gave 100% in everything she did. Well, she managed to find one last way to do that, even in death. Mom was cremated on February 18th of this year. Does everybody know what Wednesday that was? Ash Wednesday, that's right. Well, all the good Lutherans and Catholics of the world were getting some ash put on their forehead. My mom was once again, for the final time, going all in, giving it her 100%. The beginning of the. So, in closing, I want to thank everybody again for coming today. It's obvious from the number of people sitting here that Mom had a lot of friends. As was said once before, I think in the service, this church, this house was her church family for 26 years while she was up there. And she was just 2 weeks shy of her 91st birthday. That's a pretty good run. She had a really full life. So what do we do as the ones remaining still here on earth while we're waiting? And to answer that, I want to leave you with a final thought that I was told after my dad died. My dad's passing was unexpected, completely unexpected, and I was telling a friend after it that I never got a chance to say goodbye to him or tell him how much I loved him. And he replied with a saying that's often credited to Gabriel Marquez, who's a Nobel Prize-winning novelist. My friend said to me, Kevin, every time you leave a loved one, say goodbye to them as if it's the last time you'll ever see them here on earth. Because one day, you'll be right. Thank you. Oh, also, if we have a portable microphone, and if anybody has any words you'd like to say, you're welcome to come up now. Otherwise, thank you guys very much for coming. God bless each and every one.
Yeah.